This week on The Sceptic, I speak to Alexander Adams, who is an artist and writer and the author of the pamphlet Abolish the Arts Council, on his new book, How to Start a Dissident Art Movement, and his group's most recent exhibition, Power and Intimacy, which is on this week in London.
Many artists and many art lovers had been noticing over the years how the Arts Council funding had been kind of hijacked for political purposes. A lot of artists and a lot of, especially art venues, now rely on funding directly from the government or through taxpayer money. It seems directly to lock out people who are dissidents, who are dissenters.
Hello and welcome to episode 54 of The Sceptic, the Daily Sceptic's weekly podcast. I'm your host, Laurie Wastell, an associate editor at the Daily Sceptic. And I'm very pleased to be joined today here in the studio by Alexander Adams, who is an artist and writer. He's the author of the pamphlet Abolish the Arts Council, and most recently the book How to Start a Dissident Art Movement. Welcome to The Sceptic, Alexander.
Thank you, Laurie. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's very good to have you here. There's a lot to talk about today, not least your exhibition that is on this week, which we'll get into, which is titled Power and Intimacy, and your book here, which we have. But I suppose we can run through this fairly quickly as the story of contemporary cultural institutions being captured by woke or progressive ideology will be familiar to a lot of our readers. So just tell us a bit about that sort of background to this movement that you are a part of and indeed leading.
Well, that came about because many artists and many art lovers had been noticing over the years how the Arts Council funding had been kind of hijacked for political purposes. It was kind of being directed into it seemed to be funding more sort of client groups and favoured political causes rather than arts, and it certainly didn't seem to be being allocated. Funds weren't allocated according to merit. So people got quite upset about that, and they've been upset about that for 20 years. I think ever since about 2000 onwards, we've been seeing this slippage, and it's accelerated, and it's been bad under both governments. So neither party has been any good on this. So writing that little pamphlet was just a way of expressing our frustration about the apparent corruption and the certain mismanagement of Arts Council funding, which I believe is about £500 million per year at the moment. So that's quite a substantial sum of money.
Indeed, and it's almost impossible to get funding for anything unless you are jumping through various hoops of diversity ideology and anything else. I mean, it's quite a shame that that's what you have to do to fund this important public art.
Yes, so the public funding has kind of taken over the role that used to be covered by philanthropists and patrons and even to a certain extent corporations, because corporations would commission work for headquarters, they would have work in their boardrooms and so forth. That's kind of, although that exists, a lot of artists and a lot of especially art venues now rely on funding directly from the government or through taxpayer money distributed by the Arts Council. And as that seems to have taken up the lion's share of the money going into the arts, it's a very serious matter when it seems directly to lock out people who are dissidents, who are dissenters, who are even traditionalists, as well as more sort of radical or nationalist or reactionary people who you might think were perhaps a little bit too edgy to be funded, but they are definitely locked out alongside lots of mainstream artists who just don't fulfill a tick box at the moment.
And before we move on, just give us a little bit of an idea of your background in art as well as a writer about these issues, you yourself are trained as an artist, and just tell us a bit about your career.
Well, I started out as an artist at Goldsmiths College in the early 1990s. People will know that this is where Damien Hirst went to college. So Damien Hirst, famous for The Shark, for founding the Frieze group, as it were, and being a core member of the YBAs, the Young British Artists, in the early 90s. He studied at Goldsmiths and he created a big splash at the time in the early 90s. And we were just the generation afterwards. And we were living in his shadow, as it were, even though perhaps our art was quite different. But we were living in we were emerging at a time when Goldsmiths was seeding lots of conceptual and new media and sassy and savvy artists who were sort of playing with media tropes and engaging with popular culture and sort of flirting with pop music and so forth. And it was a little bit tough for those of us like me who was not a traditional painter, but someone who's really committed to painting as a pure art and putting everything through painting and not sort of diversifying into new media and not doing installations and so forth. And it was a little bit tough for us. And one of the reasons actually why I went on to write a new book that you mentioned, How to Start a Dissident Art Movement, was because I felt it was too easy for me to rely on the problems of the social and the institutional blockages. It was too easy for me to blame them, and I know that other artists have done this too, so I'm speaking for more than just myself. The problem is not just that you've been locked out of institutions, the problem is also that mentally you have grown to accept the career structure that was suggested. You would go to an open studio, you would do open exhibitions, you would join the so-and-so organisation, you would go to small venues, then larger venues, then the Tate Gallery would buy your work, and then at the top you'd have a solo exhibition at the Tate Gallery, and the British Council would tour your work around the world. And that was kind of the career ladder that you were sold. And I have to say, I think I was complacent. I just assumed that if I just worked hard enough and that I was determined enough and talented enough, then I would automatically ascend up that career ladder in the way that people had done for the last previous 50 years. But I didn't, and it wasn't precisely because of my politics. It was partly because of my politics, partly because of the institutions, and it was also partly because I need to overcome some internal barriers. I made some internal mistakes, and the book is about not only blaming others for your failures as well as your successes, but also looking inside as well.
Interesting. And yes, we'll definitely get into the movement that you're very much part of founding here. But I suppose this might seem like a rarefied sort of inside baseball topic to some, but I suppose it's worth just discussing how the public, who aren't necessarily art enthusiasts but will find themselves engaging with it, and in particular this rather execrable at times modern art that you see. And one example that I remember as particularly noxious is that exhibition on the Fourth Plinth, which was called The End. It's an ice cream cone with, actually it's a drone, but it looks like a fly that's just landed in it. And just an extraordinarily ugly piece of public art to my mind. And likewise, many of our viewers will have found themselves in galleries if they do go and seeing these inscriptions on the side. Oh, here's a nice painting by, well, it's Hogarth or something. But by the way, don't forget the legacy of colonialism here. Don't forget that the 18th century was a terribly racist time or anything else. You can understand, I suppose, why much of the public today are disengaging with a lot of the art world as it's curated and that establishment.
Yes, so I could give you a good example. You gave an example about mentioning colonialism. I remember I went to an exhibition of Hogarth at the Tate Gallery. I think it was sort of 2 or 3 years ago. It was sort of in the middle of COVID. It was just after COVID would sort of started to come down. And that was kind of like it was a moral show trial of Hogarth, yes. Essentially sort of holding him up and berating him for the crimes of colonialism, even though he wasn't directly involved in that. And it was clear that the curators had this agenda that they wanted to put on trial a hero of traditional British taste, a traditional English painter who's held up as a prime example of the English school. And the idea was to mock him and deride him and poke fun at him. And then, of course, at the other end with contemporary art, for the Fourth Plinth, I should point out that the Fourth Plinth is actually directly commissioned by the Mayor of London. So, although it's using government money, this is a totally separate case of horrible stuff being done, not by the Arts Council, but by the Mayor of London.
It was Sadiq Khan who was visiting that on the London public.
Yeah, so the Fourth Plinth, I should say, is for anyone who doesn't go to London regularly, it's a fourth empty plinth in Trafalgar Square, which is used for temporary art exhibitions. The Mayor of London has even gone so far as to say that he would not commission any white male artists for the underground because he has control over art in the underground, which is a big project which funnels money to favoured artists and favoured causes. And also the Fourth Plinth, you'll find that lots of foreign artists, lots of women, lots of ethnic minorities, and it's deliberately chosen that way. It's not simply that, oh, they came up with a great idea and they were picked sort of blind, as it were, without looking at the names. The names were known, the identities were known, and they were chosen essentially because of those characteristics, not because of the work. The work yourself, as you said, is quite unpleasant, it's strange, it's disturbing. Now, I know that there is a place for that in art, and anyone who likes perhaps a little bit of Hogarth, perhaps a little bit of William Blake or Francis Bacon will have seen that in those works. But I think that this is more perhaps a cretinization of public taste. It's deliberately making things as stupid and as provocative as possible.
So in terms of the groups that you're a part of then, I think we can get more into this later as well, but one of the interesting things is that you may have a lot of people for potentially different reasons thinking that the contemporary art establishment isn't serving them very well, but that doesn't necessarily point in precisely the same direction as a movement. But nevertheless, this has allowed several of you to come together and to put on this exhibition that you're doing this week as the latest example of what you're doing. So I suppose just to begin with, tell us a bit about how that group formed. I know it doesn't have a name necessarily, but it sometimes calls itself the Vitalists. So just tell us about the circumstances of that.
Yeah, so what happened was there was a bunch of us artists who were interacting independently. So we were friends with other artists, we also shared stuff online. We were in discussion groups, our paths crossed, we had mutual friends, and we said, well, we're fed up of people complaining. We're also fed up of complaining. We've been complaining for 10 years. It's time to stop talking about what other people are doing wrong. Let's start doing something right. Let's do something for us. So let's get together. Let's just do a show. Let's put on some work. So this is something that we did in the summer of 2023. What you'll find in the book is actually the speech where I launched this group. It's called the Camden speech, and it's a very short speech. I'd been invited to deliver a speech about the inequities of the Arts Council and public funding and how terrible public institutions were. And I thought, well, I'm not going to give another speech of that character. I've done a dozen of those. And everyone at the event has attended those. They've also given their own speeches. They've written their own manifestos. I just go in and I will read without anyone knowing. I will just launch this movement in a speech to a room full of artists and curators and art lovers and people who are just wanting things to change. I'll just go in there and launch it. And that was the year that we had our first exhibition. And this is our follow-up exhibition now, 2 years later. And yeah, so we don't have a name. I guess all the best art movements are named by their detractors. So I'm sure that there are people who are not very fond of us who are cooking up all sorts of insults that can be hurled at us, and we'll probably grab hold of one of those and make that our group name.
So in terms of what you are creating then, so the latest is Power and Intimacy. By the time this is out, there'll be, I think, one more viewing left. Oh no, there'll be the Saturday and the Sunday that people can go to. So, and that's in very near King's Cross, and I do recommend it. I've just been. And the title is Power and Intimacy. What would you say are the key themes? What was it saying in that exhibition?
Well, the first exhibition was basically a group exhibition. We didn't have a theme. We just wanted to put out a bunch of work that was exciting and fun and had connections. So there's Matthew Fall Mackenzie was sort of riffing off Fen de Villiers, and they were sort of bouncing ideas back. And some of the other artists knew each other, and we were sort of in sort of artistic dialogue. And for this new exhibition, we wanted to do, well, let's do something that really excites us. We've talked so much about negative things, about how we disassociate ourselves from institutions, but we also disassociate ourselves from trad, as it were, the sort of caricature of traditional art. let's do something that really excites us. So what are two themes that excite artists? So power and intimacy. Power's great for the male nude, for action, for vitality, for sort of vigorous things, also for to do with allegory. And allegory also slips over into the intimacy thing because, for example, I've got two self-portraits, and then there's a little portrait of myself with my wife, which is quite a sort of quiet and intimate piece. It's the smallest piece there. And so, yeah, we were saying let's do things that really excite us. So let's go to the extremes. Let's go to the big, public, powerful, masculine, and let's go to the private, quiet, intimate relationship pictures and meditations.
So I suppose, has there been any difficulty in, as I mentioned earlier, clearly everyone is reacting against something to some extent, but how well does that always marry up together? Is there a sort of single animating idea behind what you're doing yet, or is that yet to sort of emerge?
I would say that, well, people often say, well, what is right-wing art? And I would say the only thing that right-wing art is, right-wing politics, and I would say that, we are largely on the right, we're in the centre on the right, but we're not explicitly political. We're not aligned with any political party. We're not interested in campaigning or backing any political figures. The right-wing view is the pessimistic, tragic view of humanity. It says that all humans are compromised. It's also, to some degree, the religious view. It's to say that man is sinful. Every person has inherent problems, and this is common amongst all people, and it always will be. The utopian view is the progressive view, and it's, if we can control society, if we have enough information, if we have enough power, if we just do things right, then we will be able to make a perfect society and a perfect person. The tragic view, which is the right-wing view, is no, everyone is compromised, everyone is less than ideal, no one is perfectible. We have to be humble and come to terms with that. And I think the right-wing view is more realistic about human nature. So I would say that right-wing art is realistic about human nature. It's realistic about human differences between man and woman, between different nationalities, between different cultures, between different artistic styles. You say that there are differences and that these are important and that they are not going to go away. They're not going to be completely melded or blended into this sort of homogeneous sort of paste, this sort of artificial, cosmopolitan, blended culture, which has no real grounding either in reality or in a place or in a people or a tradition or a religion, that's sort of amorphous and artificial. We want to go to something that's sort of more rooted and authentic, and I would say that that's what right-wing art is. And I guess if that is what right-wing art is, then that's what we do.
But there's an important bit in your book, I think, where you are discussing the fact that you can't be too self-conscious when you're an artist. And I think you're talking about yourself and your foray as a young artist into believing you could sort of make yourself into an old master yourself by replicating the whole almost aesthetic and lifestyle of it. And then you realize that that's not really possible. You can't entirely self-consciously replicate something because that's not really how it works. And I wonder if that seems a very important insight for any artist, but I wonder if that plays into one thing that's important not to do, which is, yes, you are, as you say, we're right-wing artists, roughly speaking, but what you don't want to be doing is what a lot of the very politicized art on the left or in the establishment does today, which is to say, we have a message, here's the message, and let me shove that down your throat. And it always puts people off. So, I mean, that's something to avoid, I suppose.
Precisely. So we're not preaching at all. So you come to the exhibition and you'll be excited by the dynamism of paintings of Matthew Fall Mackenzie and the brilliant sculpture by Fen de Villiers of a tackle of two sort of American football players in a sort of a dynamic tackle. You'll be able to see sort of a huge wall tapestry and stuff. There's a whole variety of stuff there. And none of it has any political agenda. None of it has any political message. I think, yes, it's an important thing to remember that traditionalists, I think people, when they react against progressivism and they react against progressive politics and a strange sort of globo homo art, which is, has no particular grounding. It's quite artificial. It has quite an unpleasant character. It's the sort of art that you see illustrating sort of health leaflets and sort of national government announcements to do with sort of benefits or whatever. You see that sort of caricatured, stylized art, very simplified. We react against that, but it's very easy to say, well, we'll just have a cutoff point. Everything before 1900 is good. We're not going to accept anything beyond 1900 or maybe 1920. And that's how we're going to combat globalization. We're going to have localist art. How we're going to combat new art. We're going to have old art. We're just going to remake old art, and we're going to build I think people assume that if you act like your great-grandparents, you dress like them, you make the art that they would recognize, that you're suddenly going to recreate that world. It's not going to happen. You don't live then. You have your brain is wired differently. You've grown up on the internet. You've traveled all over the world before you're 16, just going on holiday. You have all sorts of experiences and understandings that are completely different from someone in 1900. So what you've got to do is you have to extend tradition, blend tradition with who you are now, where you're living, what your life experiences are, and then you will come up with something that is more authentic to your time. Because there's nothing worse than going into a gallery and seeing a picture which is new, but which has been deliberately painted to look as though, it could be 1600 or 1800 or 1900. There's nothing there that will show you when it was made. And for me, that seems like a cop-out. That seems like you're afraid to commit. You're afraid to be part of the world that you live in. Now, you may reject the world that you live in. You may reject its values. You may think, I want something different. But to pretend the world you live in does not exist is simply denial, and it's not a useful or an intelligent response to the problems that we face.
And of course, there's that word progressives that we have used to characterize the present leftist art establishment. But of course, in many ways, and Ferro, who's got art at the exhibition this week, has written a piece of Daily Sceptic exploring this a bit, and the fact that, well, yes, if the leftist art establishment are progressive, then you might imagine that the right-wing dissident artists are necessarily conservative, and well, they might be to an extent in some of the values and the political ideas that they are at least gesturing to. But nevertheless, if you are breaking away from a really stuck and staid artistic mold, and that cannot merely be conservative. That's actually quite a progressive thing in itself. And how do you, I suppose, engage with that tension?
I would say what you want, if you want a new movement, you want energy. You want people who've got real passion, got real fire, people who are willing to take risks. If you're going to paint as though you're in 1900, you're taking no risks at all. So what you can do is you can reach back and you can use some of those elements, you can use some of those language, and you can try and bring it into today. And that doesn't mean using gimmicks, but you're simply reformulating things in terms of the modern psychology, your modern outlook, but you want something passionate, you want something different. And I think that just reproducing the past is it's stale. It's also going to feel inauthentic. And I would say that we have to think about someone called Jonathan Bowden. Jonathan Bowden, quite a charismatic figure, controversial figure, unstable, passionate, difficult, an outsider himself. He's someone who advocated us looking to people like T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound and Wyndham Lewis, all from 1914. These were thinkers, these were sort of radical modernists. And he said, these guys, these were elitists. They were culturally and socially on the right, but they were artistically quite progressive and avant-garde. That is perhaps a better line for modern artists who want to break away from progressivism. That is a line that you can follow rather than simply going back to traditionalist art.
I mean, you mentioned that traditionalist and traditionalism, and well, you sort of touched on it a little, but I would like to get your thoughts more generally on the trad aesthetic that you do see. And tell me your thoughts on it. But one particular criticism that is made is that it's actually, I mean, you often, strangely enough, you see these trad accounts on social media, and there's trad wives, and then they're posting pictures of themselves on TikTok, for instance. and it seems actually a very commercialized, very modern, very untrad thing to do, and almost fetishized. And in fact, people don't really live like this anymore. But that's surely not a proper way to reclaim, if you want to reclaim things of the past, to do that.
Yeah, so we have like the trad aesthetic, and often it is very little more than an aesthetic. It is a surface level thing. It is saying, well, if I wear old-fashioned clothes, if I use a typewriter rather than a computer, if I have, people aren't really going to give up their phones, but if I have a phone that doesn't have the internet, if I sort of live in an old house, then I will, as I said, like you will transform your world. But actually, it's quite a performative thing. You have to work very hard to live like that. That wasn't how people lived in the 1950s. That was just simply what everyone wore. That's what everyone did. This is a deliberate statement. It's quite an artificial statement. And as you say, it is performative. It's done to be transmitted through social media, either to make a political point or out of just personal preference, or it might be even in a monetized form. So I think I would say that's the sort of thing that excites you, but I would say it is not an authentic expression of a conservative outlook. I would say it's a compromised sham of what you think was a traditional life in the 1930s or the 1950s.
And so in terms of the actually, seriously dissident undercurrents here, I mean, of course, as you've said, it is apolitical in the broad. It's not setting out a given political ideology. You don't have a sort of tax and spend policy that you're arguing for. But I was speaking to Fen de Villiers, one of your sculptors in particular, at the exhibition earlier, and he has very sort of energetic, vital sculptures. But these aren't strictly political. But nevertheless, he was relating to me how several years ago, in merely having laid out the sculptures themselves and some of his principles for creating them, which are quite robust and sort of and say, well, this is sculpture, and sculpture is one thing, and you can't say that anything is a sculpture, for instance, and sort of just demarcating his artistic principles for these kinds of things. He was being labeled a fascist. And indeed was run out of the mainstream art establishment. So, but I mean, he was fortunate that he was able to find different funding sources and that kind of thing. But it's interesting that there's an attempt to sort of pigeonhole any kind of, let's say, clearly defined artistic principles, and maybe with a bit of vitalism as well, and maybe some masculinity in there too, that will be sort of aggressively pigeonholed and demonized in this way.
Yeah. So people who are passionate about aesthetics and they say, I want to work, truth to the materials. I really want to put an emphasis on dynamic plastic forms, sort of physical forms. And when you get into that area, it's a little bit dangerous because it starts opening up all sorts of areas that are not politically controlled, that are not politically aligned. That this is the sort of thing that doesn't trade on the identity of the creator. This relies purely on the merit of the thing itself, not even the name of the artist, just purely how good the picture is, how good the sculpture is, how exciting it is, how suited for purpose it is. And once you get into that area, it kind of brushes away all the DEI, all the client groups, all the sort of special pleading, all the sort of historically marginalized criteria that you've had. And then suddenly you have an open playing field. And that could welcome in anyone from any background. That could be genuinely open. But what it does is it's quite a frightening concept for people who have grown up on the idea of passing down benefits and passing out favors according to identity. So that's exactly what sort of shocks their paradigm. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why they react so violently against it.
And I just suppose to give them their due in a way, what they are suggesting there, even in a somewhat hysterical way, is actually that there is
a threat. There's a real threat. There's a real threat of change. And they perceive that. And I think they're correct to perceive that because there are new things happening. We have one of our artists, Sam, Sam said, he said, in a post today, he said that they were not waiting for someone else to do something, that we decided to do something. And I said, yeah, you don't need permission, you just need passion. Just get up, get into the gallery, get something sorted, get something exhibited, get people excited about it. Don't wait for permission, just go ahead and do it. And that's exciting, and it's threatening, because we don't have any Arts Council money, we don't have any local council money, we haven't got any grants, like we don't even have any patrons putting money into this show. We did it ourselves, and it's been a great success and really excited and energized people. And I think that once you start saying that, the whole Arts Council thing, the whole waiting for permission, the whole sort of politeness, the whole career ladder structure that I talked about, that comes tumbling down, because artists are getting really excited, and they're getting in patrons and getting in just everyday punters who are excited to see the work coming in because they've seen it through the windows, and it's something that they haven't seen in an art gallery maybe ever, or maybe for 30, 40 years. And this is what's terrific, is just filling people with passion and getting out there and doing it without asking for permission.
Absolutely. I suppose to return ourselves to the exhibition itself, I mean, there's lots of very, very interesting sculptures, tapestries, oil paintings in there. Is there a particular one, not yours, we'll do one of your colleagues, and although do feel free to talk about yours if you like, but was there a particular one you were inspired by, or that you think is just very impressive?
Well, I really love The Tackle by Fen de Villiers. And one of the reasons I love it is because it's a sculpture, and very often we're mediated, our experience of sculpture is mediated through photography. It's also, even he's got a brilliant video on his X account that just sort of swoops around and gives you a good feeling for it. But actually going and physically seeing this sculpture that he's made, and he's brought over from Belgium, from his studio in Antwerp, and he's brought it over here, and you can go and see it. It's almost like, you know, going to see a piece of architecture, going to see a sort of a cathedral or something, because it's a physical experience. You're in a physical space with a really powerful, carefully wrought object, and being able to be around that and to move around it and to see it in different angles and with different light, because that's something that you don't get so much with paintings or drawings. The light for sculpture is really important. And so that's why I'd say that was a really exciting thing to encounter in the space for the first time.
Well, I mean, just on sculpture, I suppose, because that does seem like a particularly vital, as you say, and more physical form of art that you can walk around. Would you say that inherently that is perhaps a more right-wing form of art, simply because of its sort of very physical nature?
It's much more assertive, because what happens is that sculpture actually occupies the space that you are in. So it's not a picture that's on a wall that's kind of something separate and different. It's something that's assertive. It's in your space. It's kind of in your face. It says, I have a reason to exist as much as you, as much as the person. I'm occupying this space. I'm alive. I'm fully embodied. And that's kind of, it's a challenge. It's almost a challenge to you as a person. It's like, how do you relate to something that is so sort of crackling with energy and purpose? It's almost like an animal. What I love, the sculpture that I love most is Egyptian sculpture, and also Assyrian sculpture, which is really it's got a huge potential, physical potential. And the sculptures of animals are terrific. And in a great piece of sculpture, you get that, and it is quite assertive and vital and almost frightening. It gives you a tingle. Yeah.
And so let's bring it back to the difficulties. So there's obviously the fact that the Arts Council doesn't like to fund dissident art is one thing, but you're also mentioning, I think it might have been in your Barbican speech, but in general in your writing, that to the extent that a movement like yours is seen as really perhaps political, but dissident generally, that there may indeed be those who would like to see it shut down. And of course, we had Fen de Villiers being called a fascist for his art for some reason, because of the vitalism of the sculptures. Is that a concern you have, that forces somewhere might say, "Oh, I don't like this. I see this as threatening, and I want to go after you"?
Anytime you're doing something new and distinctive and unsettling, people are going to be opposed to it. People are going to be unhappy about it. this has happened to all sorts of sculptors. It happened to all sorts of artists. It happened to artists on the left in the 1930s in Germany. I think that if you do something difficult and dangerous, you must expect to face consequences, and your art has to face consequences. It's possible that if you are sort of blocked, as it were, you lose venues through the sort of intimidation of the venue owners, or people get sort of scared from commissioning pieces, that you end up making work for private collectors. And you'll find that there are people who want to commit to supporting the art, to buying pictures, to backing artists that they really care about. And you just have to trust that there are enough of those who are going to come in and at least provide you with a living. So naturally, it's a concern. We'll see how things go. I think what's happening is we're seeing a whole shift, a cultural shift, a political shift, a sense of frustration generally, and I think that's going to translate into people saying, look, we're just not going to go to the Tate anymore. We're not going to go to, I'm afraid, the National Portrait Gallery. And both of those places have some great stuff, but they're...
Which Tate?
Oh, well, both of them. I think the Tate Modern and Tate Britain have some really good stuff. Also, National Portrait's got some, British Museum, of course. They've all got some good stuff, but it's being overwhelmed by the contemporary programme. The temporary programme and the contemporary art is awful, and people are fed up of going to these places, and they feel patronised and belittled, and they know they're getting shortchanged. And I feel terrible for those children who are being taken to an exhibition at the Tate Modern, and the only reason they're being brought in there is kind of like bodies, because they're being... it's like a sort of counter, because these venues, they count the number of visitors they get. And so if they can get in a school, a school bus, they can get in 30 or 60 or 90 children in one go. And that's rather than getting in 90 sentient adults who are paying money, which is quite difficult for some of these really boring, really patronising shows. Instead, they get in school children. So they're getting in 90 people who are kind of like, don't have a choice in the matter. And I think that people are getting so fed up. I've been to so many, I've stopped going to those shows now. I used to go to the Whitechapel Art Gallery and the Hayward Gallery and the Barbican Art Gallery. There used to be at least something stimulating or serious. Even if you didn't like it, it was worth going. But all of that stopped now, and I haven't been to those venues for sort of 10, 15 years. And I don't miss them, because I look down the listings and I just see nonsense, and I'm not going to pay to go and see that sort of stuff. And people are not going to do it. And that's why they're going to turn to us and artists like us who are doing something new and exciting and stimulating and provocative, because they're not getting it through other sources.
And yeah, certainly there does seem to be that disillusionment. But one of the potential issues that Ferro was exploring in his piece for us this week was that at the same time, often historically, the broad public has been maybe not always on board with these progressive artistic trends, and they've taken a while to actually come into acceptance as a positive thing. Is the public ready for the kinds of things that you're doing?
The public will follow when the vanguard, when the elite take up the new art. People get excited to see what the elite, what the cognoscenti, what the educated, committed, serious collectors and patrons want. People get excited and they will follow. And it has always been the case in terms of intellectual pursuits or cultural pursuits or political pursuits, that you have an elite which leads and sets the agenda, and the public follow afterwards. Now, not in an ignorant way, not in a herd mentality way, but they have to be presented with something strong and vigorous and cogent, and it needs to be sort of explained to them, and then the public will follow. But the elite have to do it first. So as Ferro points out, what happens is this art that we are making now is going to the top. It's going to serious collectors. It's going to people who are not afraid to take risks, who are going to sort of gamble a little bit with new ideas, new artists, odd things that people might consider transgressive or peculiar or sort of oddly atavistic. sort of a very old form of art which is rising up, and then the public will follow. So I think that's a natural progression.
Okay. And in terms of the progression of the movement and your group in particular, I understand you had a successful opening night on Monday and lots of interested guests. Where do you go from here? And I mean, it seems this seems to have been a pretty strong step forward for you.
Yes, we had a fantastic reception on the opening night. Lots of useful and influential people. Some people who probably don't want their names out. So, but then there's also we had sort of philosophers and artists and collectors and critics and minor political figures, and yeah, it was really exciting to have those people there. I think the next step is bigger shows, better shows. What we would really love is for some private patrons to come in and say, we'll give you 30, 40, 50,000 pounds to do a big show, have a bigger venue. We're going to pay for some work to be transported from artists we have artists from all over the world in this exhibition. So we have British artists. We have Fen de Villiers, who's in Belgium. We have Harold, who's in America. We have Ryan de Fern exhibiting in London for the first time. He's an Australian artist. Brilliant, brilliant talent. What we want is for someone to come in and say, look, I'm going to put down some money. We're going to get an especially good venue. We're going to have a printed catalogue. We're going to bring some stuff together. We do already have interest from galleries on the continent, in Belgium and potentially Austria and other places as well. So there's a possibility that we'll be doing exhibitions in Europe as well. So the next thing you might see is a bunch of group exhibitions and maybe some solo exhibitions from these artists in the group in Europe, possibly in America. We're talking to an association in New York. So that would be really exciting to do something there as well.
And in terms of the skills that are required for this, of course, one doesn't necessarily think about that element of an artist's life, but having to really go through a lot of training to whether it's oil painting or whether it's sculpting. And do you feel that to some extent what your group will be doing is keeping some of these skills alive and actually properly passing them down? Because if a lot of public art is going towards just sort of wishy-washy political messaging, then that would seem that it's not really going to cultivate the kind of immense talent that you would need to create something very valuable.
Absolutely. So what's happened is that when I was at college, and this has got so much worse now, you had a problem of de-skilling. So you had tutors who couldn't teach you practical skills to do with what they did because they got craftsmen to do it, or they got manufacturers to do it. So they're like, oh, we're casting something in resin, so we get in this team because they know how to do it. Or casting in bronze, so we hand that onto the foundry. We're going to be manufacturing a giant plastic house, so we're going to go to a company that manufactures plastics. And so they couldn't actually teach you the techniques because they didn't know them themselves, which is so different from what was happening 30, 40 years earlier, where even if you were not carving the stone by hand, you knew how to do it. You were getting an assistant to do it, but you could do it yourself. So what we're thinking about now is, well, yeah, we've got some young artists. We've had so many young artists contacting us through back channels, and they're just sort of saying, I'm so frustrated at art school. I can't see a way forward with these art galleries, with these museums. I'm just not getting the opportunities that my skill warrants. Can you guys help? Can I exhibit with you? Do you want to come and exhibit in Prague or in Madrid or something? So people are contacting us and inviting us. And so what we can do is not only to lead by example and present our work, and also to help them out with exhibitions and also for them to help us out. What we can also do is train people. We'd love to have a system, an atelier system, where I could teach etching and drawing, and Matthew could teach painting, and Fen could instruct pupils about carving plaster and casting in wax and so forth. This is something that really builds bonds when you have a lineage, an apprenticeship. So I think that it would be terrific if we had an opportunity to that because we all have skills. in the group. And this would be fantastic if we could start passing them on to colleagues and then also to the next generation who are coming up behind us.
Okay, and let's end with your book then, shall we? I mean, we have been obviously discussing it throughout, but what would be a key insight from how to start a dissident art movement that you'd like to talk about? And then, just tell us a little bit about this particular painting, which is titled Argonaut, I believe,
yes.
And what it means.
Okay, well, Argonaut is quite a personal picture. It was a painting that I approached because it was to do with looking inside, because I had made personal mistakes. When I got married, I learned a lot of things about myself, and having discussions with my wife, and then also just reflecting on how things had gone, I realized that, I had been externalizing my problems, that I thought that, all of the difficulties that I'd had in my career were because of my politics or to do with institutions or funding. Actually, a lot of it was to do with things that I hadn't recognized about myself. So you have to look inside yourself. So the painting was about a man about to go on a journey, sort of an Argonaut from ancient mythology, who's going on a journey to discover the new place that he has to get to. He has to embrace his destiny by taking this journey. And it was also painted at a time when my uncle was dying. So he was facing death. He was facing the journey to the afterlife, whatever that afterlife would be. So it was sort of both a painting of rebirth and understanding and self-mastery, and also the voyage to death and eternity and hopefully afterlife. And in the book, I would say, one of the key things is it provides anyone who's an artist, a writer, anyone who's creative, anyone who wants to stand apart from the status quo at the moment. Read this book and you'll find some lessons in there that you can apply to your own life about looking inwards, taking things seriously, not taking on trust the things that you were taught at school by your parents. Re-examine things. Go back to older texts, older traditions, and see what they believed. And I think that once you do that, you will be ready to start your own dissident art movement, or your own dissident literature movement, or photography, or cinematography, or music.
Alexander Adams, thank you very much for coming on The Sceptic.
Thank you, Laurie.
And that's it for this episode of The Sceptic. Thanks for watching, and see you again next week.